So we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, and welcome to the Tippy College's webinar on launching and growing your business. My name is Barb Thomas, and it is my pleasure to coordinate today's webinar. Now, this webinar is the fourth and final webinar in our entrepreneurial series. Now, each of the previous three webinars are available on the Tippy College's website, as well as on our YouTube channel. Now, like our other entrepreneurial webinars, I am going to let you know there is a resource document, and there will be a link to that included in the follow-up email that we send you. That email will have a link to the video as well as a link to that resource document. Now, before we jump into the main topic, I do want to highlight two upcoming webinars. The first will take place on Wednesday, May 21st, and is on navigating career transitions, defining your next steps. The second webinar is the annual State of the College webinar from our Dean, Amy Christoph Brown. That will take place on Wednesday, June 11th, and there will be registration links in the chat. Now, there are also two in-person Tippy alumni events scheduled. One is tomorrow, and if you're in Des Moines, you are welcome to attend. It will be tomorrow, April 17th, at the Des Moines Big Grove Brewery location. And for our Chicago area alumni, you're invited to join a networking reception on Friday, May 9th at Theory in River North. Now, for more information on those events, please visit the Tippy alumni webpage found at tippy.uiowa.edu/alumni. So now back to today's session. Today's webinar will be moderated by Kurt Heiar, Associate Professor of Practice in Entrepreneurship. He is also the director of the NSF I-Corps and the Faculty Graduate Student Incubator programs here at Iowa. He is joined by a distinguished panel of experts, including Tom Cardella, founder and CEO of TLCx, and a 1995 graduate of our MBA program. Our second panelist is Eric Engelmann, general partner at ISA Ventures, a partner at Novy, and board chair of the New Bohemian Innovation Collaborative, otherwise known as NewBoCo. He earned his BBA in economics from the Tippy College of Business in 1997. And our final panelist is Francis Johnson, who has served as the Chief Innovation Officer at Perspective Therapeutics. We will have time for questions at the end of our discussion. So for that, we ask that you please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can feel free to use the chat to talk to your other guests or attendees, as well as the panelists. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt. Kurt, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Barb, and welcome, everyone. I will add that because of the topic we're covering today, I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I know a number of you who've registered are as well. I've done 5 companies, including several for the legendary investor John Papajohn, both domestic and international. So I mention that because part of my perspective, although I'm not on the panel, is as both an entrepreneur and a corporate person in my past at Baxter Healthcare. I also will mention that our format today is distilled from questions, answers that were submitted both by our experienced panelists as well as a lot of you registrants. And while we probably can't get to them all, we're going to make sure that we have you have access to different resources on the chat and elsewhere that you can find out some of the answers to your questions or get a hold of us individually. With that, we'll start with the introductions to our panelists. I want to remind everyone, as Barb said, we do have a series of programs, and some of those answers I just referenced can be found by looking back at a few of our other series that we've done already. So with that, let's start with Eric. Would you please tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey, and then we'll go on to Francis and Tom.
Sure thing. Thanks, Kurt. I graduated University in '97, had a job for 2 whole years in Cedar Rapids before I decided, boy, I should be an entrepreneur, because clearly with a business degree and 2 years of work experience, I know everything there is to know about starting a business. We were doing web applications early on, and we're honestly just got lucky. We had the right skills at the right time. So that company's called Geonetric. It's still going in Cedar Rapids today. I was the CEO of that company for 15 years. Then I started NewBoCo that Barb mentioned. It's a nonprofit that works with entrepreneurs in an accelerator program. So I got to work with a lot of entrepreneurs there. Then we launched ISA Ventures in 2020, and now working on Novy, this venture studio program. So entrepreneurs all the time. That's what I do, and it's been a great journey and learned a lot.
Dr. Johnson.
Yes, hello. My name is Dr. Frances Johnson, and I am not a business college graduate. I'm a physician, scientist, and entrepreneur who first got into company creation when I was a young faculty member at Stanford University around 2000 and helped found a molecular diagnostics company that was for diagnostics for transplantation. And then I stayed in transplantation as a physician and running programs for another 20 years before I met up and went into business with my co-founder, Michael Schultz, who was doing something really incredible with radiation and molecularly targeted radiation for cancer. And so we spun out of the University of Iowa as faculty members, and that's how our second company came to be.
Great, welcome. And Mr. Cardella.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I graduated from the University of Iowa's Executive MBA program in 1995, where I wrote a business plan and started a company right after graduation. That company grew to 2,000 employees, was number 8 on the Inc. 500 list in the year 2000. And I sold that company in the year 2000 to the same corporation that owns or has spun off companies such as Expedia, Ticketmaster, Home Shopping Network, Match.com, LendingTree, and many others. Ran a large company for them. Didn't really enjoy it because I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Set out my non-compete and started the latest company 18 years ago. You know, nobody does it on their own. We're so fortunate to have so many people that have been with us 25 and 30 years. Along the way, I was fortunate enough to receive an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, a regional finalist, and several times. And then, Kurt, I think it was 2022, the University of Iowa Entrepreneur of the Year award. So, again, nobody does it on their own. Very fortunate and happy to be here today.
Terrific. Well, thank you all. And again, welcome to all of our participants. We're going to start with a question for Eric. You know, one of the most important things that entrepreneurs must do as part of a successful business launch is to make sure that there is appropriate product market fit. And the reason is because that's often frequently overlooked. So I thought Eric should start us off with talking briefly about what product market fit is and why it is so important.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics, and working with a lot of entrepreneurs right at the very beginning when they're trying to figure out if there's even a need and a problem that they can solve. Product market fit is that signal that everybody's looking for, trying to figure out, how do I know when I'm ready to jump all the way into doing this? And the before time, before you find product market fit, you're exploring, you're asking questions, you're getting to know the market, you're asking for interviews and things like that. When after product market fit, that's when the market's pulling it from you and your whole worldview constrains down to, whoa, this group of people right here, these are the people I'm trying to make happy. And they're asking for new features and new capabilities and proof into the solutions we're providing. So it kind of goes from this freedom place to, oh God, my life is now just responding to these people. And depending on what you like as an entrepreneur, sometimes that's a jarring shift. But that's when it shifts from, hey, I have a hobby or a research project, into, hey, I have customers now, and my job is to make them happy and keep them happy. So it's an exciting shift and a challenging shift, but that's the thing that makes it a real business.
Terrific. Either other panelists want to weigh in quick? No? Okay, let's go to question 2. This will be for Frances. A critical success factor, as you know, in addition to product market fit, is the role of capital in launching and building a business. And I know that you've had experience with that. So I thought maybe I would ask you to share just a little bit about what the capitalization process was like for you. And if you had any need as the investors and stakeholders got involved to have to pivot from what your original vision was.
Those are really good questions, Kurt. And how you capitalize your business really depends on your goals and what type of business you're in. For us, we were developing drugs. And so we had a very long timeline. We knew that we wouldn't have revenues for a long time. An exit may come even before revenues. But we also had a long stage where we needed to retain a lot of control of the technical aspects and of that drug development. So how we approached this was, well, it takes a long lead time to get to what is really a minimal viable product, or you could think about it as a maximal virtual product because you have to do a lot to make sure it's safe before you start to human test it. And we wanted to have non-dilutive capital as long as possible. So it's important to think about dilutive capital, non-dilutive capital, debt versus equity, and what's short and what's long term. So number one, don't run out of money. Number two, do not bankrupt yourself, any of your loved ones, the company, right? So non-dilutive capital, we really doubled down on. And non-dilutive capital can be debt, right? And so, did we get a line of credit? Yes, we got a line of credit with a personal guarantee, but we made sure that that was something that we weren't going to bankrupt ourselves with. Did we get a partner? Yes, we got a co-founding partner who brought both cash and then in-kind contributions. We did business competitions. We did NIH and NCI grants and contracts. We did state matching funds. We got debt that was guaranteed by state programs, such as the IADA, Wellmark funds, and matching funds for the grants that we were putting in. That gave us a good, 3 years. And then we brought in, a hybrid kind of model, which is the convertible note, which is debt, but it's also converted then to equity unless you fold the business. So angel capital came in with convertible debt. And then ultimately we had a Series A equity round, which was valued. And then 2 years later, we went to the public market. And at that time, an IPO was just it wasn't very favorable. That kind of capital was too expensive for us. There weren't many IPOs going on. So what we did is we entered the public market through a merger. And so that merger and acquisition changed Viewpoint Molecular Targeting to Perspective Therapeutics. And that was effectively an exit for that business and gave us a whole new set of capital, and we maintained management positions. So that's how we did it.
Kurt, additionally to Francis's point, number one, you don't want to run out of money. And of all the business plans I reviewed over the years of people wanting to start companies, if they have experience in the industry they want to enter, normally they understand the expense side of the equation pretty well, but they overestimate the revenue side, and by anywhere from 25 to 50%. And so, they really want to tell a great story to potential investors, and this is how fast we're going to grow, but that's simply not the case. And many times I've asked them to reduce their revenue expectations by anywhere from 25 to 50% to make sure that they have the capital they need and they don't run out of money. And the second point I would make real quick is that many of the terms Francis used, a lot of people might not be familiar with, but there's plenty of resources that people can go out and use, including the Small Business Development Council. Paul Heath, based in Iowa City, but there's regions all over the state of Iowa, and then other states have something very similar.
Great points. Thanks to both of you. We will stay with Tom for our third question. You know, once a company has launched or is in the final pre-launch stage, there are multiple challenges still ahead. And I would argue one of those significant channels is hiring. There's always a need for good people, for a team, and hiring executives to support the founders is one of the more important activities that any founder or entrepreneur pursues. And at times, the skills that are needed during the early launch phase of a company are different than those when it comes time to keep up with a growing business. It's not necessarily the same hat that you wear all the time. So I thought I would ask Tom if he could speak, because he's done both, if he could speak to the things that he feels are successful when hiring your team both early on and then as you grow your company.
Absolutely. Culture is critical. Each entrepreneur has a culture, and they want that culture to permeate throughout an organization. My track record has been that I've not always done a good job hiring. And as soon as we determine that maybe I made a mistake or we've made a mistake as a company, we have to part ways with that individual because they're just not exemplifying the culture of the company that we need. But, you know, as you grow, you certainly have to turn over responsibilities to other people that you trust. We're in a stage of the company right now where we've decided that we're going to grow rapidly, or more aggressively, I should say, with a $100 million vision to a $250 million vision. And I've recently hired a new chief commercial officer that's come in, and literally he's wearing the hats of a chief operating officer, a chief executive officer, several hats right now. But he has a perspective, having come out of a publicly traded $2.4 billion organization and overseeing $600 million in that organization. He has a perspective, and it's important that we listen to him, and we are. Additionally, though, we've now turned over hiring of additional salespeople to him. Certainly, I get the opportunity to interview those folks as well, but you have to have confidence, first of all, in the people that you're hiring as you're growing aggressively. And more importantly, maybe most importantly, you have to make sure that you understand that you don't understand everything as you grow. And it's important to surround yourself with individuals that think a little differently than you. They can still embrace the culture, right? But they may have other perspectives on how to get to the next steps along the way. You know, CEOs that are afraid to surround themselves with individuals that think differently and just want to have yes people, those companies typically don't grow. Any CEO that thinks they have all the answers, that's not a recipe for success.
Thanks, Tom. You know, we have founders in our audience today. I mentioned earlier that point. And that kind of leads us to the next question for Eric and Francis. As a company grows, the founder too may go from being a generalist, sort of as Tom just said, you know, wearing lots of hats because you don't have necessarily a full leadership team around you. But then you go from that and you become more of a specialist as a founder. How do you determine, Eric and Francis, your niche in the company as it grows and when it's time to realize that the generalist role may be getting to be too much?
Gosh, I think sometimes you start as a specialist, and when you're first getting your business going, that technical expertise is important. And then it shifts, and suddenly you have to wear a lot of hats as your business starts to grow, and you have to have your own learning curve. And then suddenly, when your vision and mission coalesce, and you know what you can be the best at, then it becomes clear that there are certain talents that you need in the company, and you need it now. You're not going to be able to learn it fast enough to get where you need to go in your execution, but there's that phase of exploration, and then there's the phase of execution. So for me, when it's clear what execution needs to be done, then it's clear when to give up control and bring in someone who knows more about a specific aspect of the business. And for me, that was shifting from one executive position to another. But it could be an exit or any variety of things.
Yeah, those are good points because everybody's journey is going to be different. You're going to start with a different skill set, and the business might just require a completely different set of skills from you. When I started my first company, I was the software guy. I built the thing that we sold. That was my role. Quickly realized there are people much better at building this stuff than me, and the company needed a CEO. But I didn't come at it with CEO skills. I kind of went from a generalist down to, well, I have to learn what a CEO is. And there are things that when you have 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 employees are wildly different. And those skills you have to be the leader of it, or at least figure out how to make sure the company has that leader. And that might mean things like, how do you set vision? How do you build a culture? How do you take responsibility for what's happening? Because nobody's going to own it or love it the way you do. On day one, you mess it up. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but once you have 20 employees and you're firing people because you messed up, it's a very different skill. So you have to grow with it as well.
Tom, did you have a comment?
I think, it's also important to make sure that you understand the customer base and the individual sitting across the table from the customer or the client, whoever it may be. There has to be a certain relationship that can be built there. I'm in the stages of my life right now where I need to step away from the sales side because the people across from the table now are about 20 to 30 years younger than I am. And I'm okay recognizing that perspective and knowing that when I need to go in and be the cheerleader, that's my role in the company now.
Great.
The role of network is really important there that you're talking about, right? So for example, with our company, if you need large amounts of capital from, say, a big healthcare venture fund, you want somebody across the table from those people who've made them money lately, right? That network. And that network is really important, and it's nice, when you can recognize either you have it or you don't.
Let's step back for then just one moment because, at universities across this country, there are a lot of university researchers that found companies and play a role, at least up to some point. And there are often times when you have to make the decisions we just talked about where you need to bring in some talent, executive talent, to help you. That leads us to the question, though, when is it time to go all in? If you are a founder or you are a researcher who's been instrumental in the technology or so forth, you want to go in and make it real. So how do you cross that bridge?
That's a tough and loaded question, and it's going to be different, I think, in every scenario. When I started my first company, I was engaged to be married. I was 24. I rented a little duplex in Coralville. I had no debt. I was fortunate to come out of school without debt. That was back in the day, maybe when that was a lot more possible. And what was I really risking at that point? I remember telling my father-in-law, hey, I just quit my job to start my own company. Maybe I was risking that. But like my risk profile to go all in was pretty low at the time. Whereas other people are in a different situation, financially or commitments and the things they're trading off. When I work with founders, it's really hard to raise capital from an investor who's going to give you money if you're not all in. So there's kind of a big balance precipice there where you have to decide, if I'm going to try to fund this thing in any way other than just selling my thing, because I need to. For example, Dr. Johnson's business, for example, would just require the capital up front. There's no way to do it without raising capital earlier on. But in our case, we sold stuff in the first month of starting a business. It was just a different kind of business, and we could cash flow it early on. So our risk profile was very different. So it's a balancing act of what financial resources are necessary to run it. If I'm selling part of my company to investors in order to go all in, to pay myself something so I can survive, Am I okay with the equity that I'm giving up to do that versus what risk am I taking on personally and to be able to chase this, and how good are my odds? And I think, as Tom said, everybody thinks their odds are better and their revenue is going to grow faster than it actually does. So a lot of times, we're counseling them to temper their expectations a little bit, that it'll be harder than they think it'll be. But going all in is, almost required for it to be successful early on. If you're tiptoeing in it, it gets pretty hard to build a business.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Now, I have an opposite, not exactly an opposite perspective on this with the long lead time in my business before revenues, and that is don't quit your day job. And so in my first business, that business also went public, but I stayed in my profession, one, because I love my profession, but also because I was a single mother in my 30s. And I didn't jump back into the entrepreneurial pool until my daughter graduated from college. As a matter of fact, the very year she graduated from college, I jumped in and tried to keep my day job, and realized that there was too much tension between the time that was required for that. And so then I went part-time and continued to take a job in private practice that had a higher return for the number of hours that I was working, so I could spend most of my time on the business. And then for me, it's when you have borrowed enough of other people's money, those investors deserve you to be 110% present for the company all the time. And so when we got the Series A, that was it.
Any comment, Tom, you want to add?
I would emulate what Eric said. Each person is going to be a little bit different. When I started my first company, I looked at what the worst case scenario was. And the worst case scenario for me was I would file bankruptcy, but I had an education from the University of Iowa with an executive MBA, and I would just turn around and go get a job. But to Francis's point, the next step was we got angel investment money from a group of doctors, lawyers, businessmen out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now I have a responsibility to them, right? And then we were able to get that group out with a group of more institutional investment. And so we just kept building it, along the way, and everybody received a return on their investment until we ended up selling the company 5 years later. And, the people that stuck with us did really well.
I'm going to stay with you, Tom, and the other two would want to add into this. A hot topic over the last several years has been the role of remote work, remote workers, hybrid workers, and so forth. And this has required an adaptation, I think, in terms of company leaders. And it's not been without both challenges and opportunities for companies and company executives. When you have a significant number of employees, it may be a little different scenario than when you only have a few employees. But I'd like you to comment on, what has been your experience with this new paradigm and any thoughts you see in the coming years.
We could talk about this subject for hours, but let's keep it brief. Coming out of COVID, workers had a different perspective on how they wanted to work on behalf of a company. We're a heavy company, with hundreds and hundreds of people. And we started moving people out of brick and mortar into work from home during COVID, but we've maintained that model now. We're fortunate to have an individual, David McCormick, who did the same thing for eBay. He oversees our work at home model. But the difficulty for us is, and we've got great technology, our systems engineers, geofence people, et cetera. But, we have people working from home in 10 different states right now across the United States. And, we have to be careful. Some states have laws that are so restrictive, we would never have people working from home there. The state of Illinois, for example, says that we have to pay a certain percentage of a person's electric bill if they're working from home. Other states have labor laws that, could get you if you're not careful. So Micah Gilchrist, who heads up HR, she's always making sure that we're in compliance in the states that we're in. There's a certain group of states we'll never go in. And then, of course, managing remote workers, it's hard to keep the culture of the company when you're managing remote workers. Brick and mortar is difficult as well, but, at least then you have everybody under one roof. And in the remaining brick and mortar locations we have, especially in El Paso, Nikia does a great job maintaining culture. But managing culture in a work from home perspective is much different. You can utilize some of the same tools, but it requires different thinking and people that are interacting with the individuals working from home hourly in many occasions with the chat functions, right? I would see if Eric and Francis have anything to add to that, but it's a different challenge.
Remote work was a real benefit for our company. It allowed us to recruit talent that we wouldn't have recruited otherwise. Maintaining culture, I agree, is important and difficult for remote workers. And we're just now, I think, starting to understand what might be best practices for those remote teams. But in my own mind, I kind of think about those remote groups as needing some of the culture and leadership tools that you would use in a smaller company. You have to get them to feel like a team, right? Just like when you were small, and get them to interact often so that they feel like a team, and then have opportunities to get people together at the management level or above.
Absolutely.
Right. Another topic that is all over business these days, artificial intelligence. And there's different takes on the role of AI, both today and what's coming in the future. I would like to ask each of you if you have thoughts, on, first of all, how do you see AI affecting how companies scale today and in the future? Is it going to have a real impact, or will it maybe just enable them to do more with fewer employees as the big benefit over the next few years? And then how crucial do you think it is for the founder or the founders or the scientific staff to understand and know how to use these tools today? Because I think it's a fair statement, at least as the role I've played increasingly with companies and organizations as an interim CEO that comes in as a bridge. I get asked this a lot because it seems to be somewhat chaotic at the moment. And so I would like your thoughts on AI in general, maybe, or how it's going to affect companies going forward.
Yeah, in each of our industries or verticals, artificial intelligence is going to be viewed much differently. Medical versus a service industry, much, much differently. In the services industry right now, AI is the hot word, just like the World Wide Web was 20 some years ago. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows what artificial intelligence means. Everybody thinks they have their own take, and there's a dozen webinars a day on people trying to explain how artificial intelligence can benefit your company. But in our world, everybody that's done anything on the phone, calling customer service or doing it on their phone, knows that they're getting not accurate information all the time. In our world, perhaps for highly transactional services, I have a question about my bill, whatever the case may be, that can be handled in a chat box or with artificial intelligence. For more complex items, it's not there yet. Perhaps it will be in the future, but we're keeping a close eye on things. Certainly clients are coming to us and asking us what we're doing in the world of artificial intelligence to help move their company forward. Some of our clients are using artificial intelligence in a rudimentary way. We're utilizing artificial intelligence ourselves to help understand data, but the story isn't written yet. And that's going to take another 3 to 5 years, I think.
I think it's going to completely revolutionize drug development and connecting, for us, images that we see in molecular imaging with treatment responses. So there's a lot of different ways, that we can use AI. I think from just a really rudimentary perspective, we can use it for our internal processes and efficiencies. Cut down on our legal costs, cut down on our administrative costs, right? There's many, many, many ways we could use automation and AI to make ourselves more efficient. But in drug development, I think hit to lead will go faster. I think, we'll learn how to use it, and the scientists need to learn how to use it to the point where, okay, when do I have the right combinations of data to go ahead and do the wet lab testing, right? We may be able to get to a better spot before we get in there into the lab and do the really labor-intensive stuff. And just in terms of being able to look at all the different possibilities of, spatial interactions and everything else. So it will be amazing. I don't know how long it'll take. There'll be a learning curve, and I hope that we all use it to become more efficient for our day-to-day tasks first.
Yeah, it's some pretty wild stuff. And with a lot of the startups we're working with now, the advantage of creating a company now versus 3 to 5 years ago, when this stuff was pretty theoretical and not nearly as capable as it is now, is a huge advantage over competitors. As you're just describing, the cost of inquiry to explore certain territory goes way, way down, or at least it can, give you more room to run at a fraction of the cost. If you're building a software company, you can build a prototype with $20 a month on Lovable with, a few hours of work, and at least have a first mock-up ready to give to customers for feedback. When you're doing customer discovery, you could generate 100 mock-ups for $20 a month that would have cost you thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars before. Like, it's, from a software world perspective, it's just a game changer. Anything that's moving data from point A to point B, even as mundane as I take in a sales inquiry on my website, and then I have someone go say, oh, who is that? Are they the right buyer? Is their company a good fit for us? Like, AI can just do that and save your salespeople tons of time. That little tiny little step can just be replaced or almost replaced with AI completely. Like, it lets companies scale in ways where if their business model is designed to exploit it, it's a wicked advantage against the incumbents. Now, that's not going to hold true for every business, of course, but for a lot of the software, tech, data type businesses we work with, if you can think about how do you not become the pets.com of 2025, like, you can really build a business model that can just infiltrate the incumbents in a way that never would have been possible without it. It's a lot of fun to see it evolve as fast as it's moving. I'm a little bullish on the AI front, if you can't tell.
Well, you're in software, yeah.
There's certainly a lot of controversy around it. I would agree with all your comments, and I think it's going to be an interesting ride as well. One of the things that also is interesting is if any of you have ever had to pivot from your vision. We talk a lot about, when we do entrepreneurial education, about the role of customer discovery, validating your assumptions and your hypotheses to create value. And as part of that, we always ask folks to go out and talk to potential customers or who they think their archetype might be, which opens the door. Then sometimes you get information that, what you thought your product would famously be used for isn't exactly what the market wants. Any comments or experiences in that regard from any of you?
Yeah, Genetric went through a pretty wicked pivot early on. We started the company in 1999, and so our customer discovery, I don't know we would have had that phrase, but that's what we were doing, was saying, hi, do you want to be on the information superhighway? They'd say, oh my God, yes, we just budgeted 100,000 for that. And we'd say, okay, we'll help you. It was amazing. So we had product market fit, or so we thought early on. But what we started to discover was building web applications for anybody and their brother wasn't really much of a business model. And so a few years later, our hard pivot was, hey, we're going to pick an industry lane and get really, really good in a specific industry. and then leverage that knowledge to be at the top end, command the highest price, and deliver the highest value for that industry. We ended up choosing hospitals, healthcare as our industry focus. But that was like a brutal pivot. I mean, we told dozens of customers that by the end of the year, we didn't want them as customers anymore, which is a difficult thing to do. But it ultimately played out exactly well. And, we had to learn our way through that pivot.
Terrific. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, we had a similar situation coming out of COVID where the second largest telecommunication company was doing $40 million of business with us, and their business model changed. They were hemorrhaging customers, and that was impacting us. And we made the decision that we were going to have to part ways, and we did over a period of months. But that left a sizable hole in our revenue stream. It took us the better part of a year and a half to recover from that. But we went in eyes wide open. We made the decision. The decision was correct, but it was painful. And I thought it would take us a year to recover from it, and it took us 6 months longer.
Well, I'm surprised I'm saying there's a silver lining to not having any cash or revenue. But the fact that our only revenue was coming from research grants and contracts really pushed us to do things like the University of Iowa I-Corps program, which was 12 weeks. And then the following year, go to DC and do the national program. And then we really brought that home to our very small team. We were 8 at the time out there at the research park. And we worked on our culture, and we worked on our, hedgehog concept, like in good to great, on what we could really do that made a difference. So we worked long and hard for several years on, customer discovery, market fit, and making sure that our platform was ready to meet the needs of the customers that we had interviewed.
Kurt, there's a quick story that was told by one of the adjunct professors when I was getting my executive MBA. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he had started a company in the 70s to literally build and lease to cities around the United States these giant machines that literally burn up trash. And they invested all this money. They had all these ads placed, and the federal government made a law that said you can't do that anymore. And he said, we didn't know what we were going to do. And the phone rang one day, and some city said, do you do water treatment plants as well? And he said, yes, we do. He goes, we had no idea how we were going to do it, but that's how he built his company.
It's a great story. It's a great story, Tom. Building companies is one piece, and Francis alluded to this earlier. But there's also a lot of founders out there and who want ultimately to be acquired. They want an M&A as an exit strategy, and there's obviously major points in the process when you go through, being acquired. Would you comment, any or all of you, on what that process is like and any key milestones that you would say, you really need to pay attention to if you start getting courted?
Wow. So, there's the business exit, and then there's the personal exit. Those two things are often connected, but are not the same. And I think that it's important that you try to align yourself with what you think is right for the business and the right exit for the business. And if your desires are different from what you think is best for the business, you come to terms with that, right? But as you go through your different stages, your investors, of course, will have different ways that they see success. And they may or may not align with yours, right? So you might have Series A investors that want you to go very quickly to an IPO. You as a founder may really care about getting that thing to the market, and you think that you're really meeting a need. You want to see sales of that, and you want a strategic, right?
Right.
And you're working very hard to get a strategic partner who's going to acquire you. That's some of the differences. So if you know in your heart of hearts you really want to have a strategic M&A, then be careful about what kind of investors you have in Series A, right?
Right. Yep.
Because they'll push you potentially in a way that you don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And same way with hiring. You're going to hire potentially a CEO or other executive officers. It could be a CFO. And you're going to incentivize them to bring a certain, result to your company. And often that result is something like an IPO or an M&A. So incentivize those people correctly. I could go on and on about this, but please, let's hear from the other folks.
Yeah, so, I think the first point is that if you're going to get in, quote, to bed with someone else, you need to make sure that you can sit across a table from them when things aren't going well, because things don't always go well, and you can have a professional conversation. Right now, we've been approached several months ago by a publicly traded artificial intelligence company, believe it or not, with offices across Singapore, Hong Kong, and San Diego. But they want 51% of the company. And quite honestly, I don't want to work for anybody else. It'd be great. I mean, they have unlimited cash. What we could do to move the company forward would be unbelievable. But I don't want to work for somebody else. I don't want to change the culture of the company. And I don't want to have my folks in the company worrying about what some other large publicly traded company might do to their position. That being said, there are ways to get minority investors where you still have the majority. Yes, they're going to have seats around the table now, but if you're aligned on your vision, 3-5 years down the road, then there might be something to be said about that.
Okay. So we're going to be coming up pretty soon on time to take some questions from the participants here, but I will close with one last question for our panelists, and thank you very much for very insightful commentary, by the way. But the last question I would like to do is, when you as a founder move on from the business, can you characterize on a personal level, I mean, how that feels and how you feel you can contribute either to colleagues or students or employees or whomever is important as you transition something you've worked so hard on and for so long? What kind of impact does that give you to see that whole process unfold as a person? Because, and again, I also would mention, some founders I've worked with, their real goal is societal good. They want to take something to the market that will help people worldwide that need help. Others, frankly, have a bit more of an investor outlook, and they want a windfall for their employees and their stakeholders and themselves. And there's a big gap in between those two sometimes. How does it feel? Let our audience know, how does it feel when you do that?
Well, I just retired from my company, so I'll take that first. I think that it feels a little bit like being a parent. I have a child who's now 32 years old, and I remember when she went to college, she became independent, I felt like empty. I didn't think I would, but I did. I felt that, suddenly I didn't have this thing that I loved, and nurtured every day around me. And I feel the same way about my company. I miss my company. I miss what I'm doing. But you also then realize that you will be a parent forever, because wherever your baby is going, you have been there before them. And suddenly things start to come back. Things come back. You start finding ways of giving, you start finding ways of influencing and doing your thing. And it's great. So That's my take on it. I was surprised by how much ambivalence I had about the separation, even though I had predefined what I would consider success and when I wanted to go.
Thanks, Francis. Tom, Eric?
Yeah, just, briefly, when I sold the first company, I was 38 years old, and similar to Francis, the day I walked out the door, I was lost. I mean, there's only so much golf you can play. And so after 2 years, my non-compete, I started another company. But now, today, there's some mixed emotions. I don't ever see myself retiring. I love what I do. However, 33% of the stock in the company is owned by either current management or former management. And I have a responsibility to them, 18 years in the making now, to give them value for their stock. And so how do you do that? And, it's a difficult question, to say the least. Do you do it through a minority investment? Do you do it through some sort of buyout? These are difficult questions.
Yeah, I was fortunate in the ways I've moved on from companies that I've started where I could still maintain a little bit of a role in it that scratched the itch that I enjoyed and maybe jettisoned the parts that I didn't. So like, for example, at NewBoCo, I'm on the board, which is all the involvement I want. I volunteer for them. I help them out all the time. Jill, who runs that now, is a great friend and I work with her all the time. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm not involved in operations of that. And that lets me maybe makes it a little bit easier. But that was just a fortunate situation where I could kind of carefully draw those lines out to keep the parts I wanted and move on from the parts that I was no longer in love with.
Terrific. Thanks, Eric. And although I'm not a panelist, as I said, I'm a serial entrepreneur too, and I still find myself hungry for the next opportunity to do something along with my academic work. So I'm not sure once you go through it once that bug ever leaves you. You've tasted it and it's hard to let it go completely, I think. But Francis, thank you so much. And Eric and Tom, and now Barb, will turn it over for a few questions. Is that fair?
It is. So here's one I think is kind of interesting from the Q&A. So you've all enjoyed some success in your fields, but can you identify a time in your career where a failure either helped you grow personally or your company?
Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
As I said, there's a long list, but the one that sticks in my head was we tried to launch a new product at Geometric in 2008, and we got spanked so hard that it was the ego of the kid that thought, he figured it out. If I did it once, I can certainly do this again. It didn't work, and that was part of my journey ultimately to what became NewBoCo. As well, what if I did just get lucky that first time? And there was a lot of luck. What is this science of knowing when an idea is the right one to build and to build a company out of it? That's how we ended up starting an accelerator and a venture fund and everything else. So it was a pivotal failure, but it turned into a whole career trajectory change that's been an exciting avenue to explore and learn.
Great. Tom?
In the early days of this company, we had a client that represented a large portion of our business because we were still fairly new. And we had a security issue with one of our individuals and they fired us overnight. You're talking 200-300 people with no jobs overnight. And what I didn't recognize was that we spent 99% of our day on this one client, which literally was smothering us and our ability to grow. The best thing that probably happened to this company was this client fired us. We woke up after the shock wore off. We woke up invigorated, right? And we were able to grow the company over the next 3 years, 3x, just based on the fact I wasn't dealing with these people, 7.5 hours out of every day.
That's great. So we're starting to get close on time. So I want to kind of hit on one topic. So there's a lot of questions about help with marketing, help with what kind of company should I register? How do I, how do I do a copyright? So I know I have some experts here who know of those resources in our community, many of which are listed on our fabulous resource document, I will say. But Kurt, possibly Eric, do you want to highlight some of the amazing organizations that are available at least to Iowans? And are there others that would be available to people? Because we do have an international audience with us today. Any insights?
Well, the first insight I have, in experientially speaking, is entrepreneurship, innovation, and building companies is a team sport. It's a networking sport. Every one of you on this call today should be immediately committing to say, I'm going to build as big a network of folks that I may not need today, but I may need next year or the year after as I possibly can. Because you can't do it by yourself. And that's the first thing that I would say is that we have this, as Tom mentioned, the Small Business Development Center and a gentleman who runs that on campus, but he's available to refer you wherever you are in the country for a lot of really valuable services. In our case, he knows almost everybody that you'd want to know in Iowa. He has resources to help you develop your financial statements. He has resources and connections of attorneys who will do some free gratis work for startups, hoping that you might pick their firm down the line. And so that they patent work and so forth. And there's a lot of people out there, if you look at state and professional associations and conferences, that you can make relationships with and introduce yourself with and so forth. I mean, you know, I had someone recently who was starting a company that would affect operating room nurses. And, you know, I said, well, check, the state of Iowa, I believe, has a state association for OR nurses. They're going to know everybody and everything you probably need to know, so contact them in Des Moines. But wherever you are in whatever state, those are all commonalities. So I would look at those resources as well.
Excellent. Eric, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the Iowa ecosystem is that you plug in anywhere and you will get routed within, 1 degree of Kevin Bacon or whatever to the right person, because we're all so connected. There's amazing attorneys and CPAs, tax wonks who can help with those questions that you mentioned, Barb, on incorporation and copyright, things like that. There's events like Entrefest that's coming up, if I can put a plug in for that, in Cedar Rapids in June. And then there's just the organizations, nonprofits, NewBoCo and EDC, and the ones that Kurt mentioned. There's just so many ways. So just get plugged in somewhere and they will get you routed to all of the options that are available. We're all pretty tightly connected.
Exactly. So if you want to, you can all start by perhaps a LinkedIn invitation to any of these panelists right here. That's a great way to start.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just give a big thank you to Kurt, to our panelists, Francis, Eric, Tom. Thank you so much for kind of sharing your expertise and your time with us today. A reminder to everyone that this webinar is recorded, and we will send a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording. And yes, once again, I'm going to mention our amazing resource document. So on that document, you're going to find links for the SBDC, for Iowa JPEG, et cetera, et cetera. So take a look at it. That will come out in a couple of days. So in addition, when we are done with our webinar here in just a few seconds, when we close on your web browser, you will see a short survey. We would appreciate you taking a few minutes to just give us a little feedback on the webinar itself. Maybe you have an idea for another one. This whole series came from ideas from past participants. So with that, I want to say on behalf of the Tippy College of Business, thank you for joining us all today. Thank you to all of our speakers and our panelists. And as always, go Hawks. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.